God of justice, accompany us from naivety to maturity, from error to understanding, from competition to cooperation, from observation to participation, from meanness to hospitality, into the fullness of your kingdom, and abide with us. Amen. Thank you, Tracy. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Andrea. So tonight, the session that we're looking at is WATAC Explores Feminist Activism in Action. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our guests and ask them some questions. And there'll be a time for you as participants to share in small groups, to discuss and brainstorm ideas. And then there'll be an opportunity for our guests to respond to your questions and suggestions. And then the evening will wrap up hopefully right on 7 o'clock. I will stay on at the conclusion of the conversation. WATAC is prepared to facilitate networking support in response to any issues or ideas that may emerge during this evening. So I'd like to begin by introducing you to our guests and my very good friends, Kerry Byrne and Michelle Eastwood. So Kerry Byrne is the library manager at Mannix Library at the Catholic Theological College and a member institution of the University of Divinity located in Melbourne, Australia. Kerry has worked in theological libraries, and we were saying before, is it 30 years or 20 years? But it's definitely more than 20 years, as well as in library and research support roles in the Australian university sector. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree, a graduate diploma in library and information studies from the University of Melbourne. She completed a Master of Arts by Research in 2007 through the then Melbourne College of Divinity, and has research and publication interests in the area of theological libraries, collaborative collection development, and the management of library special collections. Kerry initiated the Australian Women in Religion project at the University of Divinity in 2019 and continues to manage Australia's contribution to the international 1,000+ Women in Religion project. Both initiatives are working to address knowledge and gender gaps on Wikipedia. Michelle Eastwood works with the research team at the Australian Lutheran College. She's just submitted her PhD thesis titled Shame of the Old Woman, a feminist reading of Psalm 71. And yes, she's still very excited that she's submitted. Her research interests include gender and sexuality, Hebrew Bible, and worship and liturgy. Michelle's been involved in feminist activism since her teens, inspired by some of the teachers at her school. Her other activist interests include the environment, the status of refugees, challenging racism, and advocating for the LGBTIQA+ inclusion and affirmation. And tonight we're going to look at how a lot of time and energy is spent in religious and church spaces fighting patriarchal systems and hierarchies that inhibit women's full participation. While this work's really important, I think we all know, especially after the plenary council last week, that it can be disheartening and exhausting. So the Australian Women in Religion project encourages participants to do things that are meaningful, but also spark joy in those that are involved. So the project's focused on writing Wikipedia articles about prominent women across Australia, New Zealand, and Oceania to try and redress balance on the site. I'm going to leave it there with the project, and I'm going to go to our guests with a couple of questions. So Kerry, would you like to begin and tell us a little bit about where you found out about the project and how you became involved?
Sure, thanks Tracy. And just before I start, I might just acknowledge that I have 3 daughters who've joined the session this morning. I very much appreciate that. They wouldn't normally be seen dead at a session like this, but they've come in wholehearted support of their mother, so that's fabulous. So I first heard about the project when I attended a Theological Library Association conference in Vancouver in 2019. And over morning tea one day, I had a chance conversation with the chair of the International 1,000 Women in Religion project. And it was the first time that I'd heard the statistics of there only being 18% of biographical articles on Wikipedia about women, and only about 10% of editors being women. And I hadn't heard those statistics before, and I found them to be quite shocking. And immediately, just as part of that conversation, I felt like it was a project that I could contribute to, and that addressing those gaps and that gender imbalance was important work, even if it was just going to be one Wikipedia edit at a time. So I suggested to Colleen at the time that the University of Divinity, where I was working, might be able to coordinate the Australian contribution to the project. And I guess since then I've had the pleasure of leading the project. So that's where I got started.
Great, thanks so much, Kerry. I also had a chance meeting with Colleen at the American Academy of Religion conference. I think it was in Boston, and she's a force to be reckoned with. She certainly has done amazing things with the 1,000 plus Women Religion project overseas. And the first thing she said to me is, do you know Kerry Byrne in Melbourne? Like all Australians know each other. But there was only one degree of separation, and that was Michelle, who I'd met at another conference in Fiji. So, Michelle, can you tell us about what the reasons are for the gender imbalance and what makes it hard for women to be notable on Wikipedia?
Yeah, so we know that it's a man's world, right? Not just within the church, but generally. That's why WATAC and other organisations like it exist. In terms of Wikipedia particularly, men are more likely to have their work and life stories featured in the news, in books, and just generally in the media. They're more likely to be nominated for prizes, and they're more likely to get prizes. They're more likely to be in leadership positions. So all of these things lend into the notability status too. And then we have the idea that men tend to write articles about prominent men. So all these things feed into the gender gap on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia are aware of this gender gap. But it's a bit more than that too. The standards of that notability suit the things that kind of show that men in certain occupations are likely to be notable. So there's an apocryphal story that there was a woman who got a Nobel Prize who didn't have a Wikipedia page, and then people were trying to delete it straight away because they didn't think that she was notable enough. So if you can get a Nobel Prize, and I saw the stats just this week about the gender imbalance in the Nobel Prizes. If you can't use that as notability to get a Wikipedia page, who can? Which leads into the other thing, that women's pages are more likely to be targeted for deletion. So they have to spend, women editors spend much more time and energy making sure their pages are better, defending the need to keep pages, and just, spending energy on these tasks that the men don't have to do because they're not targeted in the same way.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And if we get time later, we might talk about a couple of the targets that the project has had here in Australia. But Kerry, we mentioned that there was this international project happening overseas, mainly in the US. But also in other places around the world. What sets the Australian project apart?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I think one of the early things that was different about our project is that we started by collating a huge amount of data before we even thought about writing Wikipedia articles. So after our first planned editathon was cancelled because of COVID, I spent a large amount of time just compiling not just a list of names, which is now over 560, but also collating a huge amount of data about each woman into a huge Excel spreadsheet. And all of that information was then uploaded into Wikidata, which is a sister project of Wikipedia. And this meant that there was a lot of information already available for editors. And it was easy for us to identify low-hanging fruit, like women who were already included in the Australian Dictionary of National Biography or other noteworthy reference sources, but women who also didn't have a Wikipedia page. So I think it was part of our sort of high level of organisation right from the start, and that might just be because I'm an uber organised librarian, but it kind of put us ahead right from the start, and our project is now kind of being used as a model for other projects around the world. An international, colleague from the US recently presented at a conference, and it was evident from his data that there were more Australian women included on the international project list than there were from any other country around the world. And I had a look today at the international project that lists about 130 articles that have been created this year. And of those 130, about 90 of them are about Australian women. And there's another 13 or so that have been created by an Australian. So we're really kind of punching above our weight, if you want to put it like that. I think we've also benefited from an engagement with...
Saturday and Sunday, pretty much all day, Curran Street is going to be closed. And just tomorrow...
Oh, there we go. we've kind of benefited from a close association with Wikimedia Australia. And we've had a member of that organisation be part of our core team for most of the project, and others have also helped with editathons. And I think the final thing that really sets us apart is that we've had the overarching support of the University of Divinity right from the very beginning, to the point of having our project targets incorporated into the university strategic plan, and even having the Vice-Chancellor come along to our first ever in-person editathon. So our target initially was to have 100 new articles created in 2021. And I can report now that just this morning I created the 100th article. I think it was the the deadline of having WATAC Presents looming that just gave me that extra impetus to get the last couple over the line. So thank you, everybody.
That's great. Thanks, Kerry. I just realised, Michelle, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, that people might not know what an editathon is. So I was going to ask you whether there's any interesting women that you've written about, but you might want to tell people what an editathon is as well.
Yeah, so as the name suggests, it's just a time when people get together, and we have had one online and we've had one in person, and learn to edit Wikipedia articles. So we cater for those who are just really beginning, right through to those who are quite experienced and just want to come and sit beside someone as they write their Wikipedia articles or do some research. So of course we're doing it about Australian women in religion, but Kerry and I both went to one which was a Women in Red one. Is that correct, Wiki?
Or the Art and Feminism, I think.
Art and Feminism, that's what it was. So I was able to, they had a list of women too, and I just picked a woman randomly off the list and said, oh, well, I'll research her and I can write a page. And it turned out that the person who was running or facilitating the editathon knew the person I was writing about. So that was really interesting, and it gave me a sort of a bit of a personal insight into who this person was. So yeah, that's an editathon. And come along when we have one in future. There's lots of fun.
So Michelle, is there somebody interesting that that you have discovered, like and written a page on, that you might want to share with us?
Yeah, so recently we are the Australian Women in Religion project, and I'm always looking for the person or the group that are underrepresented. So I've been writing about Buddhist women. And one of the interesting things that I find about writing about Buddhist women is they often have Asian names, and I have no idea how to say them correctly. So I might be getting this completely wrong because I've just typed it lots of times, but I wrote about a woman called Aya Naroda. She's a Buddhist nun, and she actually grew up, she was born in Europe, but spent her sort of young adult life in Sydney as this quite rich socialite woman. a neighbor invited her to an afternoon tea, and there she met a Buddhist guru. And from there, she went to become like one of the first 10 precept nuns. Don't ask me what that means, but I know it's good. This is why I like editing Wikipedia, because you start to learn different things. And I knew nothing about Buddhism, but this is a type of nun in Australia. And one of the sources that I found said, like, one of the things about becoming a nun is you have to give everything, or a Buddhist nun, you have to give everything away. So her family and friends, I think, potentially thought she was a bit crazy because she was giving away her substantial assets so that she could become this Buddhist nun and become a leading teacher. And some of those assets went to big form Buddhist monasteries in Australia. So they that was where she was a leader, but also they run retreats and have other Buddhist people in residence too. So that I found her really interesting.
Thanks, Michelle. Kerry, is there, what have you found, or who have you found who's been interesting on the project?
I think rather than just one person, it's really what I've valued, I think, is discovering something about the stories of a whole range of women who've made really significant contributions to the cultural fabric of Australian society, but whose names I've never ever heard of. So it's interesting to just pick somebody randomly from the list to do a little digging, and you end up being dumbfounded as to why these women don't have Wikipedia pages. So some of the women that I've written about have established major hospitals or schools across the country. They've led organisations, they've been trailblazers in the women's ordination movement, made huge contributions as activists and philanthropists and academics, and in so many areas. And so it's just really great to be able to discover something about these women and to be able to shine a little bit of a light on their stories. And perhaps, you mentioned the plenary council before, Tracy. Particularly this time, I think the more we can document and highlight the contributions of these women, the more we can change that kind of idea that women haven't been leaders and aren't leaders and don't have leadership potential. So that's, the kind of thing that I enjoy most about discovering women's stories.
That sounds really great. Thanks so much, Kerry. What we're going to do now is we're going to slip into breakout rooms, and I'm not sure whether you've all been in a breakout room. It is the COVID-19 pandemic and we've been online a lot, but if you haven't been, it is a bit strange. It's a bit like something out of Harry Potter, where you just shift off into cyberspace and you end up in a group. And I think James is putting us in groups of 3 tonight. And what I'd like you to do is start off and you make sure your camera's on and have just a simple introduction, your name and where you're from. And then maybe you want to have a chat and brainstorm some ideas, see whether there's anything that's come up in the discussion tonight, whether you have questions, whether there's some way that you would like to be involved, whether there's notable women that have come to mind that you're kind of thinking, do they have a Wikipedia page? And like that's really part of the project, is building this database of women who potentially will have Wikipedia pages in the future. Andrea's come back with, is it hard to put articles up for Wikipedia? Is it hard to write articles? Who could do this? How easy is it to do? Michelle, did you want to answer that?
Well, the short answer is it's not hard in one way. If you can research and find about women, then it's really easy. The hard bit is that there are lots of rules that are kind of not really rules, and learning those rules and learning what you have to do, that's the harder bit. So that's why it's really nice to have a group that we can get together and talk about those rules and say, hey, I just learned this from whatever we were doing. So, and then we can all get better and support one another.
Great, thanks so much. And so somebody's asked, sorry, the questions are now popping in and moving really fast. So, Kerry, somebody's asked how they might suggest women like for the project. So could you let us know a little bit how women might get involved if they're interested?
Sure. One way is that we're now having this Wikipedia, or what we call Wiki Wednesday, every Wednesday at 9 AM for an hour each week on Zoom. And that's a chance to kind of, hone our skills and learn from each other. So I think my email was popped in the chat box earlier. So if you're interested in coming along to that, just let me know. Next week, we've actually got a new editor who'll be working through the process of creating her first new Wikipedia article. So if you just want to have a look-see, that's a good opportunity. And we're also going to have a fuller editathon on, let me think, when is it? The 10th of November. And that'll be a 2-hour session from 9 AM to 11 AM that day. I think also our website was put into the chat box. So if you have a look there and scroll down to the bottom, you'll find a link to a list of all the women on our working list, and that's currently over 560 names. We're really keen to increase the diversity on that list. We've got a lot of white Christian women, so we particularly welcome people from other religious and spiritual traditions. So that's another way to get involved, is suggest new names for our list. We also thought that there's a lot of people who may not want to be Wikipedia editors, but they're really interested in the project and getting women into Wikipedia. So you can also kind of write, a short article in Word, find a couple of reliable reference sources about that woman, and then another Wikipedia editor can create an article for you. So they're kind of a few different ways that people could get involved. But if you look at the website, there'll be further information and further links and ways to contact me. So hopefully there's some way that you can connect in the project with the project if you're interested.
Great, thanks so much, Kerry. Michelle, there's questions about notability. So we talked earlier about how difficult it is for women to be notable. And somebody's asked also about fact checking and, how do you find out whether your source is reliable? So did you want to kind of go a little bit through the process of how you might check whether somebody is actually notable and make sure that you've got your facts right?
Yeah, so every article has to be backed up by sources. So you have to be able to find secondary sources that talk about the woman and her work and her contribution. So what I do when I'm writing an article is I type her name into Google, or I see what resources I can find. I have a look at, so they have to be reputable sources. You can't just use anything. Newspapers are great, but academic writing is good too. So I'll have a look at all the sources, and then I try and take information from each of them. And you need about 3 or 4 to get the article up. But there are different sorts of notability. So you can have a general notability, so that person is just very well known. You can have academic notability. You can have, if you're the first in something and you've got articles or reports that says this woman is the first, that's one way of showing notability. There is quite a wide variety of ways you can be notable. But I have heard of people, because the data in secondary sources is wrong. So someone might print an article about you and say you were born in 1957, and you weren't born in 1957, they've got it wrong. But because it's in that article and Wikipedia uses that article to fact check, then it's really hard to fix it and say, no, that's wrong. I know it was me who was born then. So, I mean, it's not fail safe. That's one thing we have to be aware of. But everything that we do has to be referenced. And the good rule on Wikipedia when you're writing is 1 sentence and 1 reference. So every sentence you write has to be backed up by publicly available data. So that's one way sort of it checks it, but it's not foolproof at all.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Kerry, a couple of people are asking, are there ways to control who edits the page? Like, so once you've written a page, is there some way that you can control who can edit your page once it's up there?
The short answer is no, really. It's a crowdsourced project that you may create, you know, an article, but then anyone else can come along and improve it, add different information, and hopefully, if you've followed the guidelines and only written information that's reliably backed up by sources, and they're doing the same, then hopefully the the article just grows and develops in a good way. But it's not a kind of creative writing exercise that you can then be too precious about. You have to kind of, do what you can in that space and then allow other people to improve it, hopefully.
Which is a good thing, because people do add on to your page and find things that you don't know, and it can be wonderful.
Michelle, talking about wonderful when somebody questions something that's on your page, I remember you telling us at some point, or telling us this morning at Wiki Wednesday, how difficult it is for a woman to gain notability. So even if somebody has written a book, is that book like the fact that they've authored a book a sign of notability?
Yeah, so I wrote a page about Elaine Lindsay. She was one of the women.
I think Elaine's here tonight.
She's here in the audience.
I wrote a page about you. And so for people who don't know Elaine, and I didn't know Elaine before diving into this.
I hope you got the birth date right.
I'm not even sure there's a birthday on there, or I might have guessed it. You can have a look though and check and let me know. But right, so I didn't know about Elaine. I just Googled, and I'm doing a project. I got a grant to do some work about the Women Church journal, and Elaine was involved in that. But it's been targeted by someone who regularly targets our project, saying that Elaine wasn't notable enough. And so he said, it's not enough that, and there was men predominantly saying it's not enough that she's written 2 books. Actually, we had to find people who had reviewed the books and talked about her work and said that they were worthwhile to be, they were notable books. And there were still men saying, no, this should be deleted. So that was a process of deletion. So you can target a page to be deleted if you think it's deleted. And there is one man who keeps targeting my pages for deletion, which is very frustrating. That's not the wonderful part of it. But within that, there were other women who came and said, oh, look, I found this article. And they said, Elaine edited one of these books, and editing is a creative process, and therefore contributes to the notability. So therefore she is notable, and her page is still there. His attempt to have it deleted was not successful. So that was a win, but not without cost.
So Michelle, where do I see the page?
If you just go into Wikipedia and type in your name, and if you want to let me know if anything's wrong, I'm happy to fix things as much as I can.
Okay. Kerry will be interested to know that I'm halfway through going through all the old women's church journals, chasing up people's permissions to have their stuff digitised by the University of Divinity. But I've got 18 more issues to do. But I'm back to 1996.
Okay, excellent.
Mm.
Well, thanks so much, Elaine. I was just about to ask Kerry about that project. So did you want to share, one of the things with the Australian Women in Religion project is it's not just about writing Wikipedia pages, we're also looking to look at archives. So did you want to have a chat about that, Kerry?
Yeah, sure. I was conscious that a lot of information about women in religion, particularly around the Women Church Journal, we're looking at digitising that and making it easy to access. And I think I was concerned that I don't want to speak about Elaine, but there people have been dropping off the perch, and we are losing that sense of history. And if the stories aren't recorded and made accessible, then they risk being lost. So I was hoping to create like a web presence, a repository of not just the journal, but other important source information, newsletters from early women's groups, anything else, you know, oral histories, recordings, transcripts of interviews and things like that as the project goes on and develops.
It's been a really good exercise, actually, Kerry, because I've been finding loads of people. I'm trying to get hold of somebody who does tarot readings at Wollongong at the moment. I've got emeritus professors from all over the world. I've just got such a range of people that contributed to the journal. It's been really exciting, and not that many have dropped off the perch.
That's good to hear. We're still in time.
So that's Elaine's page.
Oh, God. Oh, thank you.
Oh, 1948. Right. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. School's right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm amazed you found any other sources actually about me. So, because I was thinking, oh, well, I don't have a chance or a possibility of getting up there now.
I can put, they're the resources down the bottom. So all our references go down the bottom.
Oh, great. Oh.
So yeah, often if I've created a page for somebody that I vaguely knew and then I'm able to contact, I'll you know, email them and say, you know, have a look and see if there's anything else that you know, could be added or tweaked. And but the thing is, even if there's something wrong or missing, I can't always add it unless there's a source for it.
Yeah.
I tend to take things out if they're wrong and I don't have a source.
I was saying in our breakup group, sorry, I'm hogging this. I don't know, it was Joan Chichester I was looking up at one stage on Wikipedia, and so it was a famous US feminist theologian, and somebody had got in there and said she was the Antichrist, basically. It was the most appalling treatment of her. So I got hold of, you know, I emailed off to the editor and said, this is all wrong. This is totally factually inaccurate. So I don't know, I think it got corrected, but maybe it's the same person who keeps targeting you.
I think there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So talking about editing, you can see next to publications this little edit button. Anyone can really press that button and edit things, which means that people can go on and write that Joan Chichester and other feminists are the Antichrist. But lots of other people go back and are checking the pages and fix it as well. So it's not perfect and it's not fail-safe, but there are measures to stop those things.
I can give you some more books, actually.
Well, I'll send you a message and you can send me lots of information.
Okay. Thank you. Well, that was a bonus of coming on today.
So thanks so much for adding that. Elaine, one of the questions I was going to ask you, and I've got my list of questions here and I'm just trying to find it. I'd like to hear from both you, Michelle, and Kerry about who's next, like who else is on the list that you're excited about finding out a bit more about or writing about?
Well, there's still about 450 women that we haven't got to yet that are on our list already. So, I tend to kind of do women in groups, and I find that a faster way of doing it. So I might do 3 academics at the same time and be doing them in parallel. And so I'm actually writing an article about the project and Sisters of Mercy later this month. So I'll probably try and do a few extra Sisters of Mercy before then. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said before, sometimes it's just the random, you know, picking somebody that you don't know about and learning stuff along the way that is of real interest as well.
I will be diving into the Women Church Journal and having a look at women who contributed to that or were involved in its publication and trying to get them up, because I got a grant from ArtFink. But I'm also got Kerry's editing a book about the wider project with Atla, and so I've got a chapter that I have to write about a woman called Anique Radiant Heart. She's in the goddess tradition, and she was at the Parliament of the World's Religions. So for me, she's really interesting because I'm interested in older women and how society doesn't really value them. But she's also not an academic. So how do we get around these notability criteria, because for academics who've published lots of work and who are in the public space, it's quite easy to get them up in lots of ways. But for these other women, it's not always as easy, and particularly in things like the goddess tradition, which is quite small. Then how do we value what they do? And she, at the Parliament of the World Religions, I don't think she had a role, but she just got up and sang an introduction. So I think that's a real gift, and as a musician, that really excites me too.
Thanks, Michelle. Are there any other questions that anyone has that they want to feed into the chat? Just anything else that you wanted to share with us, Kerry, about the project and how people might want to get involved?
I'm just looking through the questions as well to see if something jumps out. Yeah, I think
Someone asked about how the Wikipedia project started, and it's about 20 years old, and there's lots written about it, but it's meant to be the collection of all knowledge. Well, it's really not. But there are open source books that you can download and read about it if you want to. And on Wikipedia, there's pages about Wikipedia. So,
yeah, I think it did have a very idealistic goal initially to be, an open source product that represented the sum of all knowledge, all human knowledge, and yeah, Wikipedia itself is discovering that it's not quite so easy to do that, and that there are lots of areas where there are knowledge gaps, not just the gender gaps, but Indigenous peoples are not so highly represented. It's a much more kind of US male, Western society centric project, I guess, and so there are lots of areas that are underrepresented.
I was just thinking when you were talking then about when we were talking about how you do different things and how you get information up on the pages and where you get your information to do this type of thing. I was remembering a few weeks ago, you would all recall that the earthquake happened in Victoria, and it just so happened that it happened in the middle of our Wiki Wednesday session. So the group of us who are on Wiki Wednesday all have kind of a wicked sense of humour. And so we decided that we would, instead that we stopped editing about women in religion and we went straight onto the Mansfield Victoria page and put in that an earthquake had happened. So we went to the ABC News site and, put an earthquake has happened in Mansfield, Victoria. And we all thought it was hilarious. And I think the comment is like the citation is still there on the Mansfield Victoria page. So I would really encourage you, if this project has sparked any interest in you, to come along to Wiki Wednesday next week and find out a little bit more about the project and how you might be involved. I've just seen that Prue, who's another member of the team, has put up there a photo of you would be marvellous, Elaine. So that's one of the things that we're also doing. In Wikidata, which I think Kerry mentioned, there's a whole lot of information being gathered about various women. And one of the things that we can do is if there's any women on the list that that we have photos of, we can gather those photos and do things like that. So we can start to get it ready for someone when they, for instance, Michelle, once she writes that book of a PhD, which the first thing that Kerry and I'll be doing is putting her on Wikipedia once she's got that notability status. And so it doesn't need to be full articles. It can be bits and pieces of information that we're gathering about women on the list. And so if you're a keen researcher, then we'd really like your help in that area. Can those links be emailed to everyone attending? Yes, we can do that. So I'm sure Andrea can do the magic of the internet and download those email addresses and send it out to everybody. That'd be great. So Kerry, is there anything else that you'd like to add? We've got about 3 or 4 minutes to go. Michelle, you've normally got a lot to say.
I guess talking about getting photos, one of the things I've had real joy doing is contacting people and saying, I've written a page about you, have you got a photo? And like the Buddhist women, I wrote to the Buddhist Women's Association, I think it was, and said, I've written about these women, can you check? And they said, well, here's a whole list of other Buddhist women that we might write, that you might like to write about. So I have a whole page of names, and I've started doing the research on them. Like Kerry, it's easier once you're in the zone to keep doing it. But those sort of networks are just absolutely fun, and it just opens your eyes to a whole world of women doing really amazing, interesting things.
Yeah, with the photos, it's not just a matter of you know, Googling and finding images because of the copyright issues. So that's why if you've got a photo that you've taken yourself, it can be uploaded, and then we can use that in your page.
And a couple of people have suggested some names in the chat, and if you can think of anyone that you would like us to add to the list, you can add it to the chat now. We will be saving the chat off, and I can pass those.
Yeah, and I can see if they're already on the list or not.
Yeah, and Andrea and Claire Condon are already on the, and Carolyn Ryan, they're already on the list already. And it is really a matter of, you know, having the resources, you know, with 500 women on the list of actually having the resources to get the Wikipedia pages written. Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I hope you've really enjoyed hearing about the project, and I'm sure that you can hear from, you know, the laughter and joy and enthusiasm that Michelle and Kerry and I talk about the project. You can hear how invested we are in it, and we'd love you all to join us on Wiki Wednesday.